Tiffany. When Tiff be tired. Okay, this meeting is being recorded. All right. Good evening. Welcome to Lighthouse for Jesus, Tuesday night Bible study. Last week, we were still in Leviticus 19, which we will finish tonight. And the title of Leviticus 19 has been The Sanctity of the Law. Everything that God does is sanctified. And we just want to make that clear. We have done 4 parts. Hopefully, I can get through these last verses quickly and go on to chapter 20, which would be the sanctity of judgment. But when I went back over it, I was not quite sure I could finish it. So this might be sanctity of the law part 5. Oh Lord, I just think everything is so important. So I will never finish. Anyway, we are going to do our best to get everything in as expeditiously as possible, but with trying to give a clear understanding of where we are. The last verses we read were verses 27 through 31. And the last thing that we talked about, I believe, was in verse 30, where inserted into these scriptures about tattoos and piercings and haircuts, which most of us think God doesn't care about. Yes, he does. And your daughters not being whores. He says, keep the Sabbath and reverence the sanctuary. And God is inserting that here because this is one of the ways that you can stop yourself and your children from committing these practices that are against God's law by keeping the Sabbath and by reverencing God's house, knowing the holiness of God's house and making that an integral part of your life. And that is still important today. And he finishes verse 30 with, I am the Lord. Again, I own you. You are my people. I make the rules. You follow the rules. So we did also discuss some of what's in verse 31. Regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. So we're going to discuss that verse 31 a little more. He says, don't go after familiar spirits and wizards. They will defile you. Now, the word for wizard, the root of the word for wizard, means to know. And that refers to the information that people are trying to get from the occult. In other words, to attempt to know what God has not revealed is actually a sin against his wisdom and against his goodness. It is merciful of God to keep certain information from us. He lets us know what he wants us to know. If God does not reveal things to us, then we don't need to know it. And when we try to find out information apart from God, then we are committing sin. Familiar spirit has a root that means family, which has a dual connotation of the familiar spirits. Notice it said spirits. It's like a family of spirits. They are, I did a study once entitled Strong Man's His Name, What's His Game? And some of the spirits that are in the family of familiar spirits are the necromancer, a medium, passive mind state, which is a state that certain drugs put you in, that is operating under familiar spirits. Drugs, which the Greek word is pharmacia, or pharmakos, which is any kind of drug, illegal or legal. Passive mind state. It changes, it alters your consciousness. Spiritism, I told you about those people last week. Clairvoyance, the practice of yoga, but also the familiar spirit can also be in the natural family because it can be genetic. It can be root, like the roots of a tree. Maybe in the past generations, our family was involved in witchcraft or voodoo or any of those things. That means that we are more prone to that because of our natural genetics, that family spirit. And the other thing about familiar spirits is that it's a religious spirit. It loves to operate in churches. So under that familiar spirit realm, you have false prophets, and you have a spirit called peeping and muttering spirit, which is a false tongue that operates in churches. It knows how to imitate the Spirit of God. But God has given gifts to the church, including the gift of discernment. And the gift of discernment can detect a familiar spirit. And I will tell you, I've seen that spirit of discernment operate in some of our young people when we used to travel with the dancers, and we went to a lot of different churches. And as soon as something was not of God, it's like antenna went up on those kids. They knew, and they were not playing with those spirits. So, as I said earlier, God is warning his people about familiar spirits, and they're real today. And those who deal with familiar spirits are forbidden among God's people. And those who are pretending, because you see, the thing about some of these spirits is they do have knowledge, because the devil has knowledge. So you have to have the spirit, the gift of discernment to know. So mediums, which fall, or who fall under this familiar spirit, they act as go-betweens that are supposed to be able to communicate with the spirits of the dead. And that also is a spirit that where demons impersonate certain people. There's 9 different scriptures in the Bible where God came against the spirit of familiar spirits and wizards. A lot of times, God's people had to drive them out completely, get them out of the land. and it is a part of satanic, demonic worship. Familiar spirits are like demons that communicate evil. They get their information from the devil. They get their power from the devil instead of from God. And people want to believe that because what they said might come to pass, or it might happen, but that's not how you judge that. You have to have the gift of discernment to know. It says, regard them not. Don't seek after them. Those are some interesting choices of words. Don't regard them. Don't look at them as someone who has something that you need or as someone that you admire. Don't go following after them. And see, this also includes false prophets. Don't go running after them. Don't respect them. Don't respect what you see as their gift. I'm not going to say that, never mind. But don't look for their promises, their predictions, their advice. The Bible says you are defiled when you do that. You become abominable to God. Because God said, we read it last week in Deuteronomy, that those things are an abomination. Okay, so also the spirit that operates here under familiar spirits is also the peeping and muttering spirit, which is one of the reasons I'm not sure if how far I can get into chapter 20, because when I went through it again and the Lord spoke to me, I had not put that in, and God quickened me that is an important part of studying familiar spirits. So let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 29, beginning at the 5th verse. And I'm going to skip around because I'm not going to try to read all of that. 1 Samuel 29 and 6. I don't know why I said. No. I'm sorry, 28. First Samuel chapter 28. Starting at the 5th verse. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. Okay, I'm going to read some more, but right here, we see that Saul is afraid. He is terrified of the Philistines. And it says he inquired of the Lord. But before I continue with this, verse 3, I should have read verse 3. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. We see what Saul did. Isn't that wonderful? And Samuel is dead, the prophet. Samuel is dead. But Saul put out the familiar spirits and the wizards. Then Saul became afraid of the Philistines. And Saul inquired of the Lord. Says God did not answer him. At this point, because of Saul's continued disobedience, God was not on speaking terms with Saul. What a terrible place to be in when God is not speaking to you anymore. They didn't answer him in a dream. He didn't answer him by the Urim and Thummim, and he did not answer him by any prophet. Nothing from the Lord. Saul is afraid. He couldn't get any information from God. So what did he do? Then said Saul unto his servant, seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said to him, behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. That is what happened. He wanted some information that God was not revealing to him. So he decided to go back to something he had destroyed, gotten rid of. Doesn't that sound familiar about what people do today? They become dissatisfied with God's answer or non-answer, and they go looking for something else. God, can I do that? Can I do this? Isn't this all right, God? God not. Either he telling you, giving you an answer that you don't like, or that he just doesn't speak to you about it because it's trifling. But anyway, they answered him and told him there was a woman with a familiar spirit at Endor. And Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment. And he went and the two men with him, and they came to the woman by night, hiding. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up whom I shall name unto thee. Key word here, bring him up. If Samuel does not come from down to up, down is hell, up is heaven. Said, bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. And the woman said unto him, behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life to cause me to die? She said, whoever you are trying to trick me. You're trying to get me killed. I operate in this spirit, and then I'm going to get in trouble. And Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Then said the woman, whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, bring me up Samuel. Bring me up Samuel from down there. Because she certainly couldn't bring anybody from up there. And when the woman saw Samuel, so obviously she saw what she thought was Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. So she knew that it was Saul, and she thought he was setting her up so he can get rid of her. And the king said unto her, be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw God ascending out of the earth. Again, look at the words. Gods are spirits coming up out of the earth. Now, do we think angelic beings would be coming from down? No. Demons come from down of the earth. And he said unto her, what form is he of? Or in other words, what does he look like? And she said, an old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed himself. She didn't say that she could see his face. An old man covered with a mantle. And again, as I said, these demonic beings can imitate I was looking for a note I had made. And Samuel said to Saul, why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? So whatever it was that was impersonating Samuel said to Saul, why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am sore distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God is departed from me, and answereth me no more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I've called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I shall do. Then said Samuel, wherefore dost thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from thee, and is become thine enemy? And the Lord hath done to him as he spake by me, for the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand, and given it to thy neighbor, even to thee, because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, nor executeth his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. And after that, it says, Saul fell, he just fell out or whatever. So we see here a familiar spirit. We see that it can imitate a religious spirit. It can imitate that which is of God, so you have to be careful of that spirit. Now, let us go to Isaiah 8 and 19. Isaiah 8 and 19 says, and when they shall say unto you, speak unto them that have familiar spirits. Now, the woman at Endor operated in familiar spirit, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter. Should not a people speak unto their God, for the living to the dead? So here we see that those familiar spirits peep and mutter. It's a peeping and a muttering sound that when they're operating in a church, is a different kind of weird sounding tongue. Peeping and muttering, familiar spirit. And now let's go to Isaiah 29 and 4. 29 and 4 says, and thou shalt be brought down and shalt speak out of the ground. Where did the apparition that looked like Samuel come from? Out of the ground. And thy speech shall be low out of the dust. They'll be doing it, that peeping and muttering kind of under their breath. Have you seen somebody acting like that in church? But anyway, and thy voice shall be as of one that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground, and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust. Do y'all see how God covered everything? If we just know where to look, he will lead us to it. He will give us the knowledge we need. He will give us the things we need to know who is not operating under the Spirit of God. That peeping and muttering spirit is a familiar spirit trying to imitate the Spirit of God, and false prophets will also use that spirit. Let's go now to 1 Chronicles 10. 1 Chronicles chapter 10, verses 13 and 14. So Saul died for his transgression, which he committed against the Lord, even against the word of the Lord, which he kept not. Okay, this is important, guys. He didn't keep the word of the Lord. That's one of the reasons he died. And also for asking counsel of one that had a familiar spirit to inquire of it. We better be careful who we're asking questions to and seeking a word from, because we might be committing an abomination to God. I actually became afraid when I was rereading this. I'm like, oh my God, so many people are in so much trouble with God. Verse 14 says, and inquired not of the Lord, therefore he slew him and turned the kingdom into David, the son of Jesse. So, two things Saul died for. We know that God took his spirit from him and gave him an unclean spirit. Would God actually do that? Yes, he would. He did not keep the word of the Lord. He was continually disobedient, and he went looking for information from somebody that had a familiar spirit. Some of us go looking for, we don't have to go look into a false prophet or running around different places trying to get a word from somebody who say they're a prophet. We read our horoscope looking for information. God says that that is an abomination. We need to be very clear on what God is telling us. Now, let me see. I had something else about that. See what it was. Also, these people, not just in the prophetic, all the drugs, all those drugs, that's familiar spirit. That's operating under familiar spirit. Any kind of addiction. That's why last week I named things like gambling and all of those things. Those are addictions. And those are a means of sorcery, of controlling your mind. And those who operate in familiar spirits will also say that they can interpret dreams, or that they have dreams that are of God, is telling you all kinds of things. They have visions. You have to be very careful, again, by whom you seek information or receive it from. We have to realize that if God refused to answer Saul, or if God refuses to answer you through regular channels of his body, he certainly is not going to use a witch with a familiar spirit to speak to Saul. Now, does that even make sense? God speaking to his people will use his written word, or he will use his called prophets or ministers who have the Holy Ghost, and he will reveal to them what he needs them to say. If you can't get an answer through that, then sit down. So it was a familiar spirit or a demon impersonating Samuel. Demons are familiar with what's going on in the world because they inhabit the world. There's this dimension all around us, the dimension that we cannot see, the air, but it is full of spirits. There are angelic beings and there's demonic beings. And that's why social media and television and all of those things that come through the waves through the air, going in and out. Those are, Satan is the prince of the air. He controls all of that to get into the minds of people, especially young people, and especially people who use mind-altering drugs, especially people who are not living holy lives. There are things that you cannot see that's in your surroundings if your surrounding is not holy. So those demons are familiar with what's going on, and they will use the information to predict, to sidetrack, to cause you to be in fear, or to confuse you. If you're confused, if you don't have an answer, and if somebody asks you a question about church and you say, I don't know why I'm doing this or why I'm doing that, or why I'm. If you're confused, you might need to renounce the familiar spirits that may be in your life. So we don't want to mess with this kind of thing. We don't want to mess with that. Anybody who thinks that they might have a familiar spirit, the good news is, as I always say, Jesus will deliver. He will set free. He will clean you up if you want to. He will. Okay. Now we're going to go to Leviticus 19 verses 32 through 37. So that will be the end of it. Okay. 32 through 37. Thou shalt rise up before the hoary head and honor the face of the old man and fear thy God. Again, I am the Lord. Before I go any further, so if you don't want to stand up before my hoary head, that's all right. But God said, if you don't do it, let's see what he does. But he said, I'm God and I'm telling you to do it. And if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, ye shall not vex him. But the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself. For ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God again. Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in meter yard, in weight, or in measure. Just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin shall ye have. I am the Lord your God, even in your measurements, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe all my statutes and all my judgments and do them. Why? I am the Lord. Things that we just did not think that God would be interested in, he is telling us about right now. You shall rise before the great. That's what hoary head means. The gray-headed. And he says man there, but he's speaking of men and women. These are all expositions of the principle. You shall love your neighbor as yourself again. Because some people act as if they don't think they ever gonna get old. So they treat old people with such disrespect. And I'm not even talking about the young people, like teenagers and people in their maybe 20s. I'm talking about people in their 30s and 40s who do not honor and respect older people. Because if you're in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, the bottom line is you will never be the equal of the person that is 70 or 80 while you 40 or 50. There's so much disrespect. And God put it as a law among his people. He didn't just say to honor and respect. He said, stand up, rise up when they come in the room. Now, that's something. It's a commandment to show respect to those who are older. Age is honorable, especially among those that are godly. The Ancient of Days wants to see humanity honor those who have been blessed with longevity. That is something that we were taught. It did not matter the station in life or the lifestyle of a person. If they were older, you respected them. You put a handle on their name, Mr. or Mrs. or Ms., and you spoke to them in a voice that had respect and honor in it. When I was going through this, I was thinking that there are a lot of people that are in trouble with God. And I can't really speak for anyone else, but I speak for myself. And there are a lot of, they're not young per se, as in their 20s or teen years, but older than that. There are some people that age don't even speak to. So it makes me sad, not for me, but for them, because it is a commandment from God. The hoary head is a crown of glory, and it should be recognized as that. I have told this story before about a man that we grew up with, who was a good father, good husband, provider. Some things happened in his life where all of that changed, and he left his family. He became an alcoholic, and at some point after I became a grown woman, I saw him so drunk, and he was trying to crawl up his steps to get into his house, which had been abandoned, and that's where he was living. And I remember getting some young men to go and help him to get into his house. And when I spoke to him, I still called him what I called him as a child, Mr. Because it did not matter what condition he was in. He was still Mr. So-and-so to me. And that is how we should look at those who are older than us, but also how much more to those that are godly, worthy of double honor and respect. Take their advice. Don't act as if they're crazy or stupid because what they're telling you is not something you want to hear or something that you don't agree with. You should make sure that they are comfortable, that that you treat them with the words that they say as if they're important. Job, in listening to his friends, what the youngest of them, before he gave his advice, he talked about honoring the others because they were elders. and they had great wisdom. The Bible teaches us to give honor to whom honor is due. It's a sad thing in a nation when the people are so degenerate and there's such disorder, when older people are treated badly. Let's go to Isaiah 3 and 5. There. Isaiah 3 and 5 says, in speaking of judgment on Judah, he's saying, and the people shall be oppressed, everyone by another, and everyone by his neighbor. And everyone by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable, against the aged people, to behave proudly against them. That is not of God. And right after that, he says, fear God. You don't fear God if you do not treat the older, gray-haired people. Of course, now you can't go by the color of the hair anymore. Yeah. Oh, Lord. Bernice. Okay. But then he says, and fear thy God. That is a part of the fear of God. There's a direct correlation between honoring the elders and fearing God. And why is it necessary? He says, because I am the Lord, and that's what I said. Okay. Now, then he goes on to strangers. He says, to treat people that come among you, particularly to stay or to, that's in your vicinity, in your environment, to be very careful of strangers. There's a scripture that says to be careful how we entertain or who we entertain. You don't know. You don't want to treat anybody bad, even if you don't know them. Don't treat them in an insulting manner. Don't vex them. Actually, don't vex anybody. Say, love him as you love yourself. Love him like you love your own people. Love him like you, but then that would be hard if you don't love your own people, wouldn't it? Don't oppress or try to swindle him in some kind of bargain, or take advantage of his ignorance of the laws and customs of where you are. Don't cheat somebody because they're a stranger. Strangers are important to God as well, and we are to be examples to them. God will punish us if we don't treat them well, or if we make their lives hard, put hardships upon them, and we should invite them to know our God. Let them know of God's love and his grace, and to tell them about the God that we know, and the reason he gives. Why should you treat strangers that way? He said, don't forget, just a little while ago, you were strangers in Egypt. At first they treated you good, and then they didn't until they didn't. So you know what it feels like. You know what it feels like to be treated that way. Then, verse 35, do no unrighteousness in judgment, in any weight, measures, or balance. That would be the measuring of selling land or fields or anything that's measured by rods, by lines, cloth, anything, or weighed on scales, all kinds of goods, whether it could be dry or liquid, uh, make it a just weight. Be honest when you measure. Fill the measuring cup to overflowing. Instead of giving a little less, give a little more. In Louisiana, I think we call it lanya. And I remember hearing someone say, this was when I was growing up. Somebody said that when you went to we used to buy sugar and flour in bags. You go to the mama would give you a quarter, and she said, "Go get me 25 cents worth of sugar." And I've heard it said that one of the little people would have a store in their house, a little room in their house. They said that this particular grocer, he said he would put his finger on the scale to make it seem as if he had given you your 25 cents worth, and he had so that was unrighteous. God does not want us to do that. It's important to God. Those things, again, in verse 36, he says, because I am the Lord your God, even in just weights, balances, and measurements. When you are supposed to be a Christian, people are looking at you and see if you act like a Christian. The people you do business with. Christians should not be like the rest of the world, cheating to get ahead, overcharging, or charging for something you're not doing right, all of that. Everything we do should reflect Jesus Christ. And the best sermon any of us can preach is the life we live. God is saying, I have brought you out of Egypt. He's telling us today, I brought you out of the world. Act like you belong to me. Act as if you are separated and that you are a peculiar people. So be honest in all of our business. Let's go to Proverbs 11:1, which says, a false balance is abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Now, adultery is an abomination. Homosexuality is an abomination. He's putting that a false balance or a false measurement or cheating somebody is an abomination. We need to think about that. It's in that same category. And then we go to Proverbs 20 and 23. 20 and 23 says, divers weights are an abomination unto the Lord, and a false balance is not good. So again, he says it is an abomination. And then he says, I am the Lord. 15 times in chapter 19, God said, I am the Lord. I'm the one with the right to tell you what to do. He still expects his people to respect what he says and do what he says. So therefore shall you observe all my statutes. That means judicial, moral statutes and ordinances regarding civil or religious conduct. Do them. Live moral lives. God wants us to have a totally separated lifestyle from the world. We need to stop trying to fit in with the world. And we need to want to be different from the world. I think that that is something that we all need to think about. Uh, and in chapter 20, next week, I'm not going to start it this week because it's already almost 8:30. But so this will be Sanctity of the Law, part 5. I believe I had 5 lessons on this. But it's very important that we know that the principles of all of these laws, God expects us to practice now, today. We will study about the judgment for not following the laws that were given to us in chapters 18 and 19, most of which we will see in chapter 20 carried the death penalty. In chapter 20, we will see a lot of the death penalty for things that were given to us in chapters 18 and 19. And are there any questions or comments?